I used to think I was a defective draft in the family. Every time I walked into the living room, it felt like stepping onto a stage where only one person was allowed to shine, and that person was never me. No words were needed, my mom's glance was enough to tell me I was not enough, not gentle enough, not perfect enough, never enough. Like my sister. I'm Harper, the second child in a middle-class American family living in the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. But in my parents' eyes, I wasn't the second child. I was the disappointment. My sister, Madison, was born exactly 15 minutes before me, but the way my parents treated us, the distance between us, felt like decades. Madison was my mom's ideal, straight blonde hair, always in bow-tied dresses, and knew exactly how to smile when guests visited. As for me, I liked walking barefoot in the garden, wearing old band t-shirts, and once got grounded for dyeing my hair blue when I was 14. My mom was a perfectionist. She had studied interior design but gave it up to focus on building a home. She used to tell guests, "Family is my greatest project." With Madison, she drew up a perfect blueprint. Top grades, soft-spoken, a love for pastels. I never saw her get mad at Madison, never heard her criticize her in front of others. But me? I was constantly edited like a messy draft. Every shirt I wore, every posture, every word I spoke. My dad was a high school history teacher. Stern, quiet, and valued reputation as if it were the most important legacy he could pass down. He had a habit of reading the newspaper every morning. And if I dared walk past the breakfast table with messy hair, he'd peer over his glasses like he was judging a poor essay. Madison was always praised. She takes after great-grandma, smart, calm, leadership material. As for me, he said one thing when I got a B+ in math. You need to do better. This family doesn't lower standards. Once, when I was 11, I was cast as the lead in the school's spring play. A comedic role with lots of lines. I ran home beaming, hoping for a hug from Mom. She gave a half smile and said, "What about Madison? Have you thought of giving her the role instead? Her voice is prettier." I froze. That whole week, I practiced my lines with a lump in my throat. And on the night of the show, I saw no trace of my parents. They had gone to Madison's City Debate Club rehearsal. I tried, I really did. I wore dresses like Madison, tied my hair the way Mom liked, joined extra tutoring groups, even though I preferred writing. But nothing was ever enough. Every breakfast felt like a silent test. If Madison poured orange juice for Dad with a charming smile, Mom would say, "She's such a proper Southern young lady." I, on the other hand, would get, "Harper, could you chew slower? You sound like a starving animal." We lived in a 2-story white house with a wide porch. The kind of all-American house you'd see in brochures. But to me, it felt like a cage wrapped in paper flowers. Pretty, but suffocating. By 9th grade, Madison had been elected student council vice president, and I got called out by my homeroom teacher for inappropriate dress, not reflecting school values. I was wearing a black hoodie and Converse sneakers covered in stickers. Mom didn't say a word during the drive home. But, that night, I found the hoodie in the trash. No explanation, no concern. I started journaling at 16, in a black-covered notebook hidden under my mattress. My scribbled words were the only place I wasn't compared. I wrote, "If I disappeared one day, would anyone notice? Or would they just think the kitchen's cleaner now that no one spills milk every morning?" I didn't hate Madison, I really didn't. She didn't try to overshadow me. She was just doing what our parents wanted. And she was so good at it, she became the shadow that I couldn't breathe under. We were twins, but life had split us into puzzle pieces that would never fit together. Madison was the framed picture in the living room, perfect, polished, proudly displayed. And me? I was the rough sketch shoved in a drawer. Forgotten. Hidden. Collecting dust. But I made a vow. One day I would leave this place. Leave behind the standards that weren't mine. Leave behind the perfect family that only existed on the surface. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not spend the rest of my life as someone's flawed copy. I used to think college would be my escape. That the gates of campus would be the way out of the suffocating shell called my family. But it turned out, I had just moved from one stage to another, where the director was still my parents, and the script was still endless comparison. My dad teaches at the College of Charleston, a respected man known for passionate lectures on American history and civic ethics. To him, everything must meet the standard. And that standard is Madison. Madison chose international business, just like Dad had said for the past 10 years. The world needs women who can calculate and speak at the right time. As for me, I was pushed into communications because it was easy to find a job. Doesn't require much creativity, according to Mom. I wanted to choose fine arts, but every time I spoke I was cut off by disappointed looks and the same old line. Harper, we didn't raise you to paint and sing sad songs in some damp apartment. Madison's dorm was in the honors wing. Large windows, new AC, a balcony overlooking the lake. Mine was in an old building, where you could hear rats scurry at night and the hallway lights flickered. But I didn't complain. I thought, at least here I can breathe. Wrong. The very first week, I was forced to attend the welcome reception hosted by Dad, after a 6-hour bus ride from home to my dorm. I hadn't even unpacked when Mom called. Harper, wear the light blue dress. Your sister picked it for you. Remember to smile when shaking hands. And, don't wear that metal bracelet. It's an eyesore. I wanted to say no, but Dad's voice came through the line like an order. You represent our family here. Don't make me look bad in front of my colleagues. So I showed up to the reception, stiff as a wax statue. I stood beside Madison, who looked like she was born to be a campus ambassador. Every word she said sounded rehearsed. Yes, I'm studying US-Asia market strategies. I hope to intern in New York this summer. I just stood there, nodding, sipping water and counting down the minutes. After that I became Dad's PR shadow. He often mentioned me in lectures as an example of doing it wrong, but trying to improve. I knew he thought he was helping me, shaping me into a good person, but really, he was tearing me apart. Forcing a mask on me, then slapping on the label, Professor Williams' daughter. I once tried to rebel by skipping Madison's study group session, where all the star students gathered to discuss case studies with Professor Hall. It felt pointless. It wasn't a discussion. It was a performance. Madison knew I was avoiding it, so one Friday afternoon, she showed up at my room with 2 bubble teas and a calculated smile. Harper, are you planning to stay like this forever? She asked, voice soft as autumn wind but sharp like a blade. What do you mean by, like this? I replied, eyeing the tea like I might throw it out the window. Not joining anything, not making an impression, not building relationships. Are you planning to disappear for 4 years? I shrugged. I just don't want to live by someone else's schedule anymore. Madison set the tea down, tilting her head like I was an equation that wouldn't solve. It's not that I want to pressure you. I'm just scared. Without backup, you won't make it. Dad won't protect you forever. I laughed, the bitter kind. I learned from years of being pushed aside. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I can't breathe precisely because someone keeps trying to protect me? Madison didn't respond. She left. And once again, I was left behind. Alone with the emptiness no advice or bubble tea could ever fill. The cracks in my family didn't come with an explosion. They crept in through words, through glances, through ceremonies where I stood present but never seen. I don't blame Madison. But I also no longer try to be like her. And one late October night, sitting alone in my room, the wind slamming against the window and group projects piling up unfinished, I wrote in my notebook. If I disappeared tomorrow, their world would keep spinning. But if I truly started living tomorrow, would they even recognize me? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I'd start looking for it. Not in a classroom. Not in Madison's shadow. And definitely not in my father's stern gaze. but somewhere else. A world where I didn't need permission to be myself. I used to believe that if I tried hard enough, endured long enough, my parents would finally see my true worth. But the deeper I went into college, that belief rotted like a wooden door left to decay in an abandoned house, eaten away by sun and rain until it lost its shape. My class schedule wasn't mine to choose. It was carefully arranged by my mom, advised by my dad, and subtly controlled by Madison. I wasn't allowed to register for courses I liked, because those won't look good on your resume. I couldn't join the photography club, because a Williams daughter shouldn't be crawling on the ground taking pictures of graffiti. I lived like a lost shadow in my own life. Every day I walked through campus halls with a notebook in hand, not to learn what I loved, but to record what was labeled safe and practical. Every subject, every exam, every group discussion, another link in an invisible chain. That night, I sat on the dorm rooftop, watching the city lights below sparkle like a world I'd never touch. Madison found me there, her heels tapping steadily on each stairstep. "Harper, I'm worried about you," she said, handing me a bottle of water. I took it but didn't look at her. "You're always worried," I said with a bitter laugh. "You worry I'm not dressed right, not smiling right, not living right. But you've never once asked what I actually want." Madison sat beside me, eyes looking far into the distance. "Because I know they won't give you the chance to choose. If you go the wrong way, they'll disown me? Cut me off? Like they did with that high school friend who lost her scholarship for pursuing art?" I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. Madison fell silent. And that silence said it all. I stood up and looked at my sister. The girl I used to secretly admire. The one so flawless she made me feel like a smear on a classic painting. "You don't get it, Madison. I don't want to be another version of you. I don't want to marry some rich lawyer, live in a 3-story suburban house and post Sunday brunch photos to build a brand. I want a life that feels meaningful to me, not one scripted like a play." She looked at me like I had spoken blasphemy. "Life isn't always about what you feel is meaningful, Harper. Sometimes it's about practical choices, about responsibility." I looked her straight in the eye, unblinking. If being practical means burying myself in things that don't belong to me just to be accepted, then I choose dreams. If responsibility means living by someone else's blueprint, then I choose freedom. Madison turned her face away, but I saw the flicker of sadness pass over her. "I just don't want to see you get hurt," she whispered. I gave a slanted smile. "I've already been hurt. Hurt by having to ask for permission to be myself." After that conversation, I started doing something I'd never dared before, asking questions. Not to Madison, not to my parents, but to myself. "Harper, if you died tomorrow, would you regret not doing something?" The answer was yes. So many things. I regretted not learning how to draw properly. Regretted canceling my freshman band audition because Mom said, "A decent girl doesn't perform on stage with tattooed boys." I regretted never making a single decision in my life without the fear of being yelled at or shamed. So, I started rewriting my before 25 list. Not for Instagram. Not to create a free-spirited girl image. But to remind myself I still had a chance to write my own script. The list wasn't long, but every item made my heart race. Write a short story and submit it to a local magazine. Ride a motorcycle once, with no destination. Dye my hair again, deep wine red. Kiss someone just because it felt right, not because they were presentable enough to meet the family. It was then I realized, if I kept living inside the glass cage called expectations, I'd die slowly, in silence. And then, one day, while waiting for the bus in the rain after a dull class, I heard the roar of an engine. A motorcycle pulled up by the curb. The rider wore a black helmet, a leather jacket, and laughed freely. "Need a ride?" I didn't know why I nodded. Maybe I was just tired of saying no to anything that made me feel alive. Or maybe that was the moment everything shifted. Some people come into your life like a storm, wild, loud, and unexpected. Jake was that kind of storm. That day was a rainy afternoon in early November, with winds tearing dry branches off the trees. I'd just left a presentation class, one my dad had strongly recommended because it'll improve your image with professors. My presentation was labeled, "Lacking Real-World Direction," a polite way of saying, "You're doing it wrong." I stood under the bus shelter, hoodie soaked, Converse shoes cold and wet, my mood sinking fast. The sound of an engine broke through the gray. A matte black Triumph motorcycle stopped right in front of me. The rider wore a full-face helmet, a dark leather jacket, and when he pulled down the visor, I saw amber eyes. Mischievous, daring. "You look like you just walked out of a meeting in hell," he grinned. His voice was low, rough, like fire crackling at midnight. I pursed my lips, silent. "Name's Jake, not a kidnapper. Just saw you here, shivering, looking like someone who could use a quick escape." I looked up and glanced around. No one. No bus. Just the rain. And the motorcycle waiting. "I don't know you." Jake shrugged, still smiling. "Then this is a great chance to change that. Hop on?" I didn't know why I nodded. Maybe it was because my heart finally beat again after weeks of feeling like a walking corpse. Maybe I needed to escape the safety that had been suffocating me for so long. Or maybe I just wanted to know what it felt like to be alive. That first ride on Jake's motorcycle felt like a slap that woke me up. Wind whipping my face, rain stinging my cheeks, the road slick, the speed fast, my heart pounding out of control, but I wasn't afraid. I screamed. Not out of panic, but because it was the first time I had taken off the mask. I wrapped my arms around Jake from behind, and in the haze of road dust and engine growl I felt a freedom so sharp it hurt. We stopped at a roadside diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and old rock music buzzing from tinny speakers. Jake ordered 2 black coffees and a slice of apple pie. "So, who are you?" he asked, leaning on his hand, his gaze cutting through all the armor I'd built up over 20 years. "Harper," I said slowly, like I was introducing myself to myself for the first time. "I'm a communications student, daughter of a college professor, sister to a perfect version of everything I'm not, and I don't know who I really am beyond all of that." Jake chuckled softly, no mockery, no pity. "Sounds like a gilded cage." I froze. No one had ever said it that plainly. "And you?" "Jake Miller. Welder. Dropped out after high school, own 2 motorcycles, have a cat named Whiskey, and a long list of places I want to go but can't afford yet." "Sounds freeing." "Sounds real," he replied, leaning slightly closer. "And I think you're starving for real." I didn't say anything, just looked down at my coffee, but for the first time in months, my eyes didn't dart away. We started seeing each other more after that. No schedule, no optimized time management plans like my mom always preached. Just conversations that stretched from sunset to sunrise. Road trips with no destination, rest stops filled with music, gasoline, and the warmth of Jake's back against mine. He never told me who I should be, never offered better life paths. He just listened, laughed when I told stories of my mom yelling because I didn't brush my hair, winced when I shared how my dad dismissed my writing as lacking academic rigor. And he said, "Harper, they want you to be something they can brag about. I just want you to be you. That's what makes you lovable." I cried when he said that. Not because I was weak, but because I finally felt seen. And I had never felt that, not even from the people who raised me. One night, sitting on a cliff overlooking the ocean, Jake said, "I don't have much to offer, no big house, no fancy reputation, but I do have one thing. Truth. With me, you never have to play a part." I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, "That's more than enough, that's everything." From Jake. I didn't learn how to live properly, I learned how to live emotionally. I stopped asking, "What should I do to be accepted?" and started asking, "What makes me want to wake up in the morning?" Jake wasn't perfect. But he was real freedom. And I knew if I chose this path, I'd lose a lot, but I'd gain the one thing I'd longed for my entire life. I used to think the worst moment of my life was when my mom called me her biggest disappointment. But it wasn't. The worst was hearing her say it while I held hands with the man I loved, who nervously smiled and said, "Nice to meet you," to his future in-laws, with all the honesty in the world. That afternoon I brought Jake home. Not because I thought my parents would love him, but because I was tired of living two lives. One mask for family, one real self for Jake. I needed to know. If I had to choose, would I be strong enough to let go of the other? Jake wore a black button-up shirt, the closest thing to formal in his closet. I wore a long floral dress, tied my hair back, and tried to look as non-threatening as possible. But I forgot one thing. To my mom, being myself was already a threat. The moment the door opened, she froze. Her eyes scanned Jake like he was a rusted lawnmower someone accidentally rolled into her living room. "Harper, this is..." Jake held out his hand. "Jake Miller, nice to meet you, sir, ma'am." His hand hung in the air for a few more seconds before my dad reluctantly shook it, as if afraid of catching welding dust. "What do you do?" my father asked, skipping all polite formalities. "I'm a welder, sir. I work with structural steel on major projects. I'm certified in safety, and currently training in technical diving." "A welder?" my mom repeated, her lip twitching. Like just saying the word left a bad taste in her mouth. I squeezed Jake's hand tighter. "Jake's the man I love. I wanted to introduce him before we take things more seriously." "Seriously?" my dad growled. "With someone who has no degree, no respectable family background, no understanding of elite society or moral standards?" I felt the heat rush to my ears. "He doesn't need a degree to be kind. He doesn't need a pedigree to treat me like a human being." My mom folded her arms, her voice cold enough to freeze a Charleston summer. "If you choose someone like him, don't expect our support. Harper, you're destroying your future." "No," I said firmly. "I'm saving it. By finally living for myself." My dad sat down, thoughtful. Then he said something I'll never forget. "If you walk out that door with him, don't come back." Jake turned to me quietly. No pressure. No interruptions. He just waited. For me to decide. And I knew. This was the moment I rewrote my story. No longer in ink my parents had picked. I gripped his hand. "Let's go." No one stopped me. No one called my name as I crossed that threshold for the last time. The door shut behind me like a verdict. The end of a long era of control. Paid for with the steepest price. Family. We left the neighborhood with Jake's motorcycle roaring like a victory song. I didn't look back. On the ride home, Jake didn't ask questions. He just reached out with one hand and held mine, warm, silent, enough to keep me from falling apart. That night, I sat on the floor of Jake's apartment. Just an old wooden table, a rocking chair, and walls covered with photos of dusty roads. I rested my chin on my knees and whispered hoarsely, "I don't have a home anymore." Jake came closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "You have a home, as long as you want this to be yours." I broke down, not from regret, but because, for the first time, I got to choose what home meant. Not a place with white doors and imported rugs, but a place with Jake, soft rock music, and unconditional respect. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. If I had to choose again between true love and fake approval, I'd still choose exactly what I chose today. If someone asked me whether starting from zero is terrifying, I wouldn't hesitate to say yes. It's terrifying enough to take your breath away. But I'd also say this. It's worth it. More than anything in the past could ever compare. Our first apartment, Jake's and mine, was on the third floor of an old building in the northern suburbs of Charleston. No elevator. No air conditioning. Summers felt like an oven. Winters howled through the window cracks like time itself groaning. But it was the first place I chose. No one planned it. No one forced it. Every morning, Jake got up at 5 a.m., packed his tools, and left before the sun came up. I woke up with him, brewed coffee with an old machine we got at a flea market for $15, then kissed him quickly before he headed out. I landed a job at a small diner 20 minutes away, on foot, not far, but just enough to soak the back of my shirt in sweat during those sweltering summer days. I waited tables, wiped down counters, carried trays, took orders, counted tips by hand because the cash register always jammed. But no one there looked at me like I was working beneath my potential. One evening after my shift, I had my feet propped up on the table, eating cup noodles and laughing at a rerun on TV. Jake turned to me and said, "You look like someone who just won $1 million. I chewed my noodles and mumbled through a mouthful. No. I'm just someone who got to live a day without pretending. We lived simply, but there was no shortage of laughter. When we had a little extra money, Jake took me on his motorcycle to Folly Beach, where we ate tuna sandwiches and shared wild dreams. He wanted to build his own electric bike, and I wanted to write a book about people who survived their family's expectations. Then one day an opportunity came out of nowhere. Jake was hired by a major infrastructure company, specializing in underwater structural welding. The pay was better, and so were the expectations. But Jake didn't hesitate. He took night classes, passed the certification exam, and 3 months later he officially became a certified diving welder. Life began to change, slowly, one step at a time. We moved to a brighter apartment with a balcony overlooking a small park. Jake suggested I leave the diner and apply for a new logistics coordinator position that had opened up at his company. I hesitated. I don't have the experience. He rubbed my back and smiled softly. You're smart, disciplined, and you know how to keep things running. I've seen it. They just need to see it too. I applied, and I got the job. The new work wasn't easy. I had to learn how to use materials tracking software, coordinate delivery timelines, and work with both cranky drivers and high manager engineers. But with each passing day, I felt stronger. Not the fake kind of strong I had to perform in front of my parents, but the real kind that came from knowing I was doing well, and I was respected. One Saturday night, after a long shift, I came home to find Jake sitting on the living room floor, holding an old photo album. He pointed to a picture of us at the beach. My hair messy, his face smudged with sandwich mayo. You know, he said, eyes gleaming with rare sincerity. This is the first picture I kept without editing anything, because it's real. Because it's us. I looked at him for a long time, and I felt a deep peace that words couldn't touch. I wasn't on any track anymore. I didn't have a fancy plaque on the wall. But I had Jake. I had a job I chose. I had quiet mornings and evenings where we talked about how our day went. Life was still hard. Some months we had to cancel travel plans to pay for car repairs. Sometimes I stressed when the company changed systems. But not once did I feel invisible. I used to think love was just a feeling, but now I know it's also a foundation. Something to stand on without trembling. A place where you're allowed to be yourself, without shame, without needing to prove anything to anyone. And that, to me, is the new definition of happiness. I can't remember the exact moment when we shifted from getting by to being okay. Maybe it was the day Jake signed his first contract with the diving crew in New Orleans. Or maybe it was the first time he mailed home a check for over $12,000 after a week of underwater work. His skin darkened, hands scraped, but eyes burning bright. Jake had become a professional diving welder, one of the few who could work 100 feet deep, in freezing water, under crushing pressure. Dangerous, exhausting. But Jake never complained. He said, "There was a time I had to choose between cleaning out garbage trucks or hiding from student loan collectors. Now, every time I dive, I know I'm building something real." His income crossed $150,000 0 cents a year in just 18 months. We used most of that money to put down on a 2-bedroom house in Somerville. White fence, open kitchen, and a backyard big enough for Jake to build a small welding shed. I planted lavender along the porch. Every evening we sipped coffee and listened to crickets, and Jake's dive stories like bedtime adventures. I thought my life had turned a page. But life has a rude habit of knocking, right when you feel safe. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing the delivery calendar in my small office when I got a call from Cheryl, an old friend who worked at the local news station. "Harper, I wasn't sure if I should call, but this is spreading fast. You should know." "What is it?" "Your dad, Professor Williams. A female student made a serious accusation. The university's launching an internal investigation. His name's already on the headlines." I went numb. Cheryl paused, then added gently, "I'm sorry if you need anything." I hung up, rose from my chair like someone lost in a fog. The usual office sounds, keyboard clacks, printer whirs, suddenly felt distant. I opened my laptop, pulled up the news. And just like Cheryl said, my father's face was right there next to the headline. "Prominent Charleston University professor accused of student harassment." The words cut through memory like a blade. I remembered all those times he lectured about professional ethics, about family dignity. The nights he trimmed speeches line by line. Everything collapsed in seconds. But the most painful part wasn't that he'd been accused. It was that I wasn't surprised. Jake found me that evening, still frozen on the sofa. He sat beside me, didn't rush. When I handed him my phone to show the article, he just nodded, softly, like he'd seen it coming. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I answered. "I'm not part of that world anymore." I thought I had closed that chapter for good, but just a few days later, the past came crashing through the door again. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was watering the lavender in our backyard when a gray SUV turned the corner and stopped in front of our gate. I recognized the license plate. My mother's car. The door opened. She stepped out first, visibly thinner, eyes sunken like she hadn't slept in days. My father followed, no longer the commanding man I once knew, but a hollow shell, drained of pride. I stood still. I didn't approach. I didn't smile. "Harper," my mom croaked. You look well." "I'm sorry for not calling first." I folded my arms, standing at the door. "What is it?" My father's voice cracked, no longer calm but bitter, exhausted. "We need help. Your sister and her husband have cut us off. They won't let us in the house. No one's willing to help with the legal fees. They're worried about the reputation fallout." I didn't laugh. I didn't rage. I just felt empty. "And you thought of me?" My mother grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling. "You're our last hope." Jake stepped out from the house, holding a cup of tea. He gently placed it on the wooden porch table without saying a word. He just stood there, like a fortress behind me. I took a deep breath, then replied, my voice eerily calm. "When I needed hope, you threw it against the wall and slammed the door. Now it's my turn. And I'm sorry, but I'm no longer the daughter you can call whenever it's convenient." My father's face flushed, his eyes filled with humiliation. "You owe us, after everything we've done for you." I looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. "No, I repay those who truly loved me. Pain doesn't come with an invoice." I turned and walked back inside. The door closed behind me. Not shaking this time, but firm, as if it had never been broken. That night, as my parents drove away from the porch in silence, the rain began. Not a heavy storm. Just a slow, persistent drizzle. Like even the sky was unsure whether to forgive or let go. I stood by the window, watching the old SUV disappear down the maple-lined street. Jake didn't say anything. He just quietly placed his hand on my shoulder. A silent reminder that I didn't have to be strong alone anymore. We didn't bring it up again. Not because we were avoiding it, but because it no longer had a place in our present life. When someone leaves, it's not the door that closes. It's the hollow space in your heart that begins to heal. 1 month later, I found out I was pregnant. The moment the test showed 2 lines, I laughed in the bathroom. Not from shock or panic, but a breathless laugh, like the universe was whispering, "You chose right." Jake didn't jump or shout like in the movies. He just looked at me, wrapped me in his arms, and whispered in my ear, "We'll be the family you never had." I held him close, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the rhythm of trust, of a home that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Throughout the pregnancy, I worked part-time from home, managing projects remotely while studying infant care, newborn psychology, and especially family boundaries. I left no room for half-open doors. No texts like, "Mom's nearby, are you free?" No unknown calls from blocked numbers. I chose peace. Jake transformed the small room at the end of the hall into a nursery. Beige walls, a moon-shaped nightlight, an old wooden dresser he built himself. Nothing was brand new, but everything had a story. Had love. In March, when winter hadn't fully let go, our son was born. We named him Asher, meaning happiness in Hebrew. Because he wasn't just a new beginning, he was living proof of everything I gave up to get here. I looked at him in the nurse's arms, eyes shut tight, tiny fingers reaching into the air as if searching for something. I leaned down and whispered, "In here. And you'll never have to run away from home like I did." We didn't throw a big party, just a few close friends, simple gifts, and plenty of warm laughter. No extended relatives, no calls from the old house. And strangely, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I wrote a letter to Madison, not long, not blaming, just an unofficial goodbye. I knew she had chosen her own path, the path of silence and denial. And so had I. I chose to move forward, no longer waiting for anyone to turn around. One morning, as I was carrying Asher around the backyard, Jake called me to the porch. He was holding a wooden box. Old, but familiar. "Remember this box where you hid your first manuscript? I found it while cleaning out the shed." I opened the lid. Inside was the unfinished novel I had started writing at 19. The one my father once called fantastical, lacking structure. I laughed. "I never thought I'd finish it." Jake looked at me, eyes sparkling. "Then maybe it's time to write the rest. But this time, no one gets to cross out a single word but you." I held my baby close, a breeze passing through the lavender in the garden, and I realized I was no longer the Harper who once stood by her bedroom window, dreaming of escaping a family built on conditions. Now I was Harper, the one who chose the right thing, even if it meant letting go of what once felt essential. A mother, Jake's partner. A woman writing her own story, with hands that no longer tremble. I used to think forgiveness meant reopening doors that had been slammed shut, but now I know. Forgiveness is when you can look back and no longer feel pain. It's living well enough that there's no space left for resentment. My parents haven't reached out again. No messages, no letters. Maybe they've truly lost everything. Maybe they still think I'm ungrateful or disrespectful. But that doesn't affect me anymore. I no longer live to be accepted, I live to be free. I'm no longer the daughter who crumbled under every criticism. I'm the woman who stands tall, holding her son, heart no longer bleeding, eyes fixed on the road ahead, where no one can take her worth away. Harper's story is proof that happiness doesn't come from pleasing others, but from the courage to live your truth. She didn't choose the path paved with expectations, she chose love, freedom, and mutual respect. Even at the cost of family ties, Harper held on to her values and built a life that was simple but complete. Through her journey, we're reminded that sometimes, to truly be ourselves, we must walk away from places once called home. What do you think of Harper's decision? Would you have the courage to do what she did? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories and powerful life lessons.